Hey Hasib, hey Nabeel, thank you so much for being a part of the second podcast for Mantis. I am the founder of Mantis. We are an ARR insights and forecasting tool for SaaS and consumption based companies. We essentially help companies bridge the gap between their GTM and finance teams, and that's the topic we want to talk about today. Really glad to have you here. Would love if you can introduce yourselves and then we can jump into it. Hasib, do you want to start or?
Sure, I can go. Hey, Kriti, my name is Hasib. I have been working in finance for the last 12 years, supporting various different organizations from, working in manufacturing to e-commerce to SaaS. I've been part of go-to-market team, ops, marketing. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to. I think this is something that resonates with a lot of different finance organization as to building and finding a solution that truly caters to both go-to-market and finance teams, kind of bridge that gap. So yeah, looking forward to talking to you and hopefully building something together.
Perfect. Thank you, Hasib. Nabeel?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. My name is Nabeel. I have been in a variety of finance, strategy, and operations roles over the past 15 years or so, focusing primarily on go-to-market strategy. I've run some F&A groups. I've run some ops functions, which in some contexts meant sales marketing and services. But throughout, I've bridged sort of those two worlds. So also very excited to see what you're building and what you have in store.
Yeah, perfect. And thank you again for being a part of this. So, Hasib, as you were saying before we started, that there's always been a gap between the GTM teams and finance team. Would love to probably understand what are some of the KPIs that GTM teams and finance teams look at, and how has that evolved over the last few years, and just how do they come together, and at what places is there a conflict between these two teams? And maybe Hasib, you can start, and then Nabeel would love to hear your views as well.
Absolutely. I think as you kind of alluded to, and I'm sure sort of Nabeel have kind of seen this throughout his career as well. Um, I've kind of seen that very few organizations are sort of, when it comes to go-to-market and finance teams are sort of on the same page because there's different priorities, right? When you talk to go-to-market, their priorities to grow their business, right? And be able to, increase their, customer revenue, reduce their churn rate, and be able to, have their control their CAC values, right? And be able to look at things that they can directly control through the resources that they have, how to build pipelines and then how to close customers, how to generate more leads, right? Versus when you talk to finance teams, their sort of primary objective is, how to control their financials, right? Prior to the macroeconomic conditions, it was more so that, you had a ton of investments. So there wasn't really a lot of pressure. A lot of times go-to-market teams sort of controlled, the investments and what they were planning on doing. And finance teams usually just, kind of went on and understood that go-to-market teams, there's growth, there's double-digit growth throughout for most of the SaaS organization companies. But once that kind of shifted and that stopped and companies started realizing that they need to control their investment, all of the sudden sort of that dynamic shifted. And now more so what I've kind of seen in my career, at least the last 2 to 3 years, is that finance teams are more in control and they're the one who are kind of deciding like, look, this is the investment that we have, and you basically have to work with what we have. So go-to-market teams are in a very tough spot. All of the things that they, kind of freely operated in and those are no longer sort of available. Now they're resource constrained and they have to go in and make these tough decisions while growing the business, while still trying to close their pipeline, increase their pipeline with limited investment. So I feel like that dynamic, that shift in itself has created sort of a lot of, I would say tension, but tension might not be the best word, but nonetheless, right? There's a lot of things that they finance and go-to-market teams sort of come together and work out and try to build, a product, a company that they can sort of, spearhead and get back to growth. So to me, like truly the KPIs have sort of shifted. Prior to that, like I feel like go-to-market team didn't really understood a lot of these metrics. You know, again, they were just growing like wildfire with a lot of SaaS organizations. So truly that didn't really matter. But now customer acquisition costs, you know, trying to understand your churn rate, your you know, NPV, and all of these various ratios have become super, super critical. And again, I think finance teams are really holding go-to-market teams accountable to these ratios because that's what investors are currently looking for. They want to make sure, especially in a lot of various companies are more of a sort of mid to small to mid-sized companies, they're truly coming in and they have these limited investment, and investors are sort of, you know, trying to hold them to a certain you know, cash flow target and a certain financial. So that to me is like, you know, the way I kind of think about, you know, how the demographics have changed kind of within these two organizations.
Yeah, that totally resonates. That conflict between go-to-market teams and finance is something I've seen throughout my career. Sometimes it's a healthy tension, and sometimes it's, you know, worse than that. What I've seen is it's often finance and go-to-market teams that are looking at basically the same metrics uh, to and there's a sort of struggle for control over these metrics because those metrics and how you report them, you know, ends up justifying whether, you know, finance gets to cut costs or go-to-market gets to grow the teams. So you end up having ops teams often caught in the middle. Sometimes the ops team itself is a tug of war. So, you know, I've seen ops teams report into finance and report into go-to-market. I think both present different challenges. I'm partial to ops teams that report into go-to-market organizations because I like it when ops teams are seen as sort of in service of the growth of business. And, you know, a source of truth of sort of the grown-ups in the room to be able to help guide go-to-market teams in a way that's responsible and sustainable for the business. But that doesn't work at every company. Sometimes there are you know, go-to-market leaders who don't have the analytical background necessary. Sometimes there are, you know, control issues, or, you know, it's just pockets of resources or expertise that make that challenging. But really, you know, the way that conflict often presents itself is the finance team calculating an LTV to CAC, let's say, that shows that, you know, the company's inefficient, and go to market saying, no, actually, you know, if you make these adjustments, then, you know, LTV to CAC is great, and we're actually underinvested, or, you know, choose whatever your favorite efficiency metric is there. But, you know, I think the KPIs, you know, they're the same. Sometimes there have been sort of trends in the market where people look at things slightly differently, but, you know, ultimately we're looking at productivity, we're looking at growth, we're looking at retention, and we're looking at measures of efficiency, sales and marketing efficiency. I think that different businesses can be pretty different, and so how you customize those metrics to the reality of a business can be really meaningful and can really help drive alignment, because, you know, not all SaaS businesses are the same. Sometimes there's, you know, a consumption element, or there's a services element, or there are things that that really drive not just confusion, but help exacerbate that tension that you're pointing to. Because again, you know, it allows finance to calculate things one way, go to market to calculate things another way, and, you know, you don't get to the sort of, you know, alignment that you need.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I would love to double click on a couple of points that you made. That I think one was you mentioned about the ops team being in between somewhere. In your previous organizations, who have you seen being the bridge between these two teams, from like a team perspective, from a process perspective? Who is the team which comes in between, and then if there's a conflict, then resolves that conflict? Would be great to get a sense of that. And also, as you touched upon, there are different business models and the KPIs differ according to business models. Would be great to get a sense of how do they differ if it's like a pure SaaS model versus like a consumption based model. Hasib, for you also, outreach has been like a more usage-based model, so the kind of challenges are very different as compared to maybe like a pure SaaS model. So I would love to hear your views on both of these.
Sure. So on your first question, the question of, who operates as a bridge, that really just depends. I mean, sometimes, I've been in an organization where I ran finance. I had a great relationship with my ops counterpart. My boss had my boss, the CFO, had a good relationship with the CRO. But there was, sort of an organization that kind of encouraged conflict and tension. And it wasn't, I thought, the most ideal environment to drive alignment. But I love it when finance and ops are besties, especially in cases where ops sits under go-to-market and you have that bridge. And I've been in organizations where that was the case as well. I've been in organizations where finance and ops are meeting very regularly, and most importantly, where any reporting or work product that is material to the business is signed off on by both is really useful. Not, obviously, there's a materiality threshold. You don't need everybody looking over everybody's shoulder, but there is, that alignment, to your point, is super important. And I think it needs to happen at the sort of head of finance, head of ops level. And, hopefully there's no drama happening at the C-suite level that jeopardizes that. So that's what I've seen. I've seen that done to, with varying degrees of success in the organizations I've worked at. To your question about how metrics change as you go from different, SaaS business models, I'll give two examples here. So I worked at Sheeta Digital, where this was, pretty large enterprise customers by and large, especially when I left and we had sort of divested or shut down some of our more SMB assets. And so at that point, we were services heavy, enterprise. We had it was a consumption business largely. There was a good chunk of commitment, but customers were committing to 60-70% of total recurring revenue. And on top of that, there was some one-time revenue. So the distinction between committed revenue, recurring revenue, and total revenue was really important. And we didn't have a useful framework that we thought made sense for the business, that was sort of standard in the market, because we weren't purely consumption based, and a lot of our services and usage was kind of more predictable. So what we did was we devised a definition of ARR that looked at essentially what were the products and services that tended to recur. How well does future consumption mirror past 12-month consumption along different categories, and how do we incorporate how do we basically take past 12-month behavior for existing customers? New customers had a different calculation, annualization process, whatever, but how do you take the past 12 months, adjust for any one-time or extraordinary things over the past 12 months, and then also adjust for any price changes or contractual changes that happened over the past 12 months and project that forward? So we built an ARR model that was just very, it was, homegrown. We built it in AWS, and we, pulled all of our data sources to do our calculations ourselves. So we, built that in-house. That's sort of one extreme. Contrast that with what we dealt with at ActiveCampaign, which was where, basically everything was committed. But these were very small customers. So they weren't committed necessarily annually. A big chunk of the business was actually month to month, but they were on, a specific plan for that month. It was not usage based for the most part. So here, we were having debates about whether the right measure for the business was MRR times 12. MRR times 12 is actually a pretty crude measure of how the business is doing, because monthly customers had really high churn rates. So, one way to think about the business that kind of combined all the factors that mattered would have been to think about expected ARR. So, monthly customers aren't nothing, they recur, but they recur at a lower rate than annual customers. So let's say a monthly customer accounts for, 60 cents on the dollar or 70 cents on the dollar or whatever it is. So there are kind of ways to think about that. There was also the issue of sort of customers pausing and resuming, and some customers paused and resumed because of, one-time financial hardship. Sometimes customers paused and resumed because of, cyclical factors. They just, they needed a blasting engine between whatever, September and December. So, tweaking your understanding of what your recurring revenue stream is for the realities of the business makes a huge difference in how you even think about, like, a simple question like, am I growing as a business? Should
Yeah.
I incentivize annual customers? You know, are we should we sell services? Or, basic questions around the business require that you understand what is the recurring revenue stream that that drives growth and retention in your business.
Absolutely. I think Nabeel, provided some really solid sort of feedback background, and I've kind of, my experience has been similar. And to answer your question, Kriti, the way I've kind of seen sort of changes within SaaS, pure license subscription based model versus consumption based model has been more and more companies have been trying to get into the consumption based model for many reasons, right? And one of the biggest one is that when macroeconomic conditions start, to get worse, a lot of companies can control their overhead, right? That's the easiest thing that they can do. A lot of, for example, sales organization can start, getting rid of SDRs and put a lot more work on AEs. So now if you're a company that's purely license-based, subscription-based, it's very difficult to control your churn, because if companies are doing layoffs, it only makes sense for them to consume less licenses. So it's a lot easier for companies to then go in and say, okay, I don't need 1,000 licenses, I only need 500 licenses because I'm reducing my headcount. So more and more SaaS organizations, in my point of view, have been deploying products or changing the way they've been kind of go to market to have a more consumption-based model, even though they have a license-based model, because for, again, many reasons, but one of the biggest one that I've kind of seen in my experience is that on a customer standpoint, it's very difficult to predict what you're going to consume, right? For the next 12 months, for the next 24 months. So just doing so, a lot of customers end up, predicting or forecasting a much higher level. So a lot of customers, they end up going in and you sort of increase your overall, value, lifetime value for your product, or, whatever metrics that you're kind of using. And then understanding how those consumptions sort of play out, like for a consumption-based model, as pure SaaS play, you look at your usage metrics, for example, right? There are a lot of, it becomes purely difficult for internal finance organization to then go in and say, well, what is my data storage? The API calls, compute instances, resources, everything that kind of goes into that consumption-based model. And now you have to dig in really deep into how you're forecasting your product, how you're truly calculating your ARR. And then that's sort of the same on the reconciliation front as well. Every month, every quarter, as you're closing the books, you're not just looking at licenses, you're looking at consumption data, what is the true of value, the chargebacks and everything else. So it starts to get really complex. And for a lot of organizations, Nabeel mentioned, there's a lot of homegrown systems, because there isn't really true SaaS solutions out there that are coming and sort of help organization really establish a platform where they can go in, they can accurately forecast, they can understand their actuals, their variances, and how their customers are sort of consuming their product, their services. And then again, I think with that, a lot of sort of the customer engagement metrics, right? How many active users do you have? What sort of features do they use the most, right? And what is sort of your true gross margin in that regard? Because again, as investment start shrinking down, a lot of companies are looking at that and saying, well, do we truly need these features, right? If they're not being consumed and yet we're deploying it on our end, can we go in and control these costs, right? So I feel like consumption-based models have become even more trickier as investment starts, shrinking, and a lot of FP&A organization and go-to-market organization, they're sort of in a dilemma where they have to now, truly understand, what works, what doesn't work, and then go in and sort of make those tweaks on the back end to truly start, capturing, the bigger value. Because again, the key here is that if you're not growing, if you're not upselling, and if you're not, growing your customer base, your new logos, right? The next thing that you have to do is continue to keep the customers that you have and increase sort of, their existing value to your organization. And the only way I feel like you can do that is through a consumption-based model. So you're going to see more and more sort of trend and companies really going in that direction, and start baking in products and features within their existing products to truly capture that piece of revenue, which I think will help them sustain their existing market and grow.
Yeah, yeah.
Dirty secret. Sorry to jump in. The dirty secret is some companies that are charging for overages don't track them, like a surprising number.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, no, absolutely. And I think that's something that we have seen companies now starting to do more and more, because then really figuring out what my true ARR looks like, you need to figure out what your overages and look like, and then get to that number. Actually, would love to. What I heard from both of you is that also there are different ways in which companies are then coming together or working together. Nabil, you mentioned that you've seen GTM teams and finance teams come together, and there were varying degrees of success at different organizations. What are some of the best practices that you have seen companies deploy to move from like maybe X point to Y point, which where Y point being where everyone is working together? So what are some of those best practices, benchmarks that you have seen? One thing that we've also heard about is this GTM finance persona or role, which really acts as like a gap between the finance team and the GTM teams. Yeah, would be also great to get a sense of if you have seen like new personas, new roles also emerging to ensure that there is no gap between the two teams.
Yeah, I've seen GTM Finance in a lot of organizations. I think when that works, it works well. Sometimes when roles, responsibilities aren't necessarily, clearly delineated, or there's, organizational potential for, conflict between the two, two people in a who have a similar skill set in, in a sector that's been contracting and seeing some layoffs, could, conceivably find themselves in, a fight for survival, or various other conflicts. Similarly, in a world where the CFO is yelling cut, and the CRO is yelling grow, then the two might find themselves again in conflict. So I think that the GTM finance persona is a very interesting one, can be a very useful one in a lot of organizations. But I think that a lot of where the alignment needs to happen, and this is probably an unsatisfying answer, but a lot of where the alignment just needs to happen is at the CFO CRO level. And a lot of CROs I have seen have been sales leaders who rose through the ranks and know how to sell a thing well, but there comes a point where they need to be thinking sort of beyond tomorrow's commission, and need to be thinking about sort of what they can sell that is, sustainable for the company. They need to have a mind toward sort of resource allocation, efficiency, productivity, and that doesn't always come naturally for CROs. Some CFOs conversely see themselves as sort of adversaries to the go-to-market organization. And look, I mean, salespeople, SDRs, various people who are, you know, commissioned on the growth of the company, sometimes have a way of thinking that is, you know, self-motivated, that is based on sort of the commission structures that we lay out for them, as they should. But I think it's, you know, there's kind of a translation that needs to happen that's really important. And that just doesn't happen if the CFO isn't growth minded and the CRO isn't, you know, analytical and also sort of strategic about the bigger picture of the business. So yeah, you know, ultimately, are there org designs that work better than others? Absolutely. And are there roles that can help bridge that gap? Yes. But you know, where the CFO and the CRO know how to talk to each other, things tend to work. And where the CFO and the CRO don't, they don't, is kind of my experience.
And to kind of tag on to Nabeel's point, I think one thing that I've kind of seen, and again, at least in the last 2 to 3 years, is, you know, a lot of successful organizations have realistic expectations from you know, sort of the CFO and the CRO organization, right? You know, prior to that, you know, a lot of the communication, again, wasn't a ton of involvement. You know, investment, as I've kind of alluded to earlier, you know, investment was easier, you know, to sort of, you know, gain, right? You know, you could go in and raise money. So who cares if you're burning, you know, immense amount of cash while trying to grow your, you know, customer base, because you can always go back, you know, even if you're not going on a secondary market, you can always raise cash. So that kind of completely shifted. And then a lot of times CFOs are still sort of holding on to the same growth rates that they've, you know, witnessed in the prior, you know, I don't know, 5-10 years, right? So then it kind of creates that dilemma. It's like, all right, we need to grow double digits, but the CRO who had sort of the boots on the ground are, you know, saying otherwise. Look, it's not feasible for me to grow 20, 30, 40% if you're shrinking my marketing sort of budget, my sales budget, and you're telling me to reduce headcount, but at the same time grow at that rate. So I feel like a lot of organization and a lot of CFOs are now realizing that we need to set more, you know, realistic expectation. And only when you do that, then you can truly start understanding, you know, what your metrics and your KPIs and, you know, truly looks like. Because if in a finance organization, if I'm still expecting double-digit growth, but it's the complete opposite on the go-to-market side, a lot of those things that I'm currently reporting on probably doesn't really mean much to the CRO organization, because CRO will come in and say, look, it's crazy for you to think that we're going to grow while you're shrinking these investments. It just doesn't make sense. So I feel like that is sort of key right now. And a lot of successful CFOs that have really good relationship with their sort of market or sales organization will tell you that, you know, they need to be aligned on what the true objective and what the true outcome might look like. Because again, you have to understand that the market dynamics have shifted. And I worked in my last company. Again, that was sort of one of the biggest reasons why there's so much sort of tension between the two organizations. Because one of the things was that the CEO and the CFO were a little bit late to realize that, you know, the markets have shifted. And they were still sort of living, you know, excuse me, living in, you know, the you know, prior to the macroeconomic condition. And that, I think, takes a takes a huge toll on the overall sales organization. So that's just my input.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. Essentially, what we are saying is one, that CFO and CRO need to understand each other, talk to each other, understand each other's mindset, growth, as well as profitability. And second is adapt to the new conditions, adapt to the new macroeconomic conditions. And alongside that, so what are some of the tactical things that companies can do either on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to get to that alignment, right? Like to make sure that um, these two roles talk to each other or they understand each other well? Are there some tactical things that companies can do?
I could take, you know, sort of the first bite at this. I think what I've kind of seen works really well is that involving finance organization and then vice versa, you know, finance involving sort of go to market, you know, CR organization, and sort of these cross collaboration, projects that they're kind of leading. Because what I have seen in some roles is that a lot of time finance will drive projects without really truly, understanding the needs of the CRO organization or getting them involved. So then what happens is you have these two organizations, they're not really talking to each other. They just probably have a monthly, recurring meeting where, one kind of goes through, what they're looking at, the other goes. There's really no true alignment, no work that they're, doing together to truly understand what one is looking for and where, things can be, worked at to make it better, right? And I think that to me, there's a difference. Yeah, anyone can have a monthly sort of, recurring meeting where you just talk about stuff that, you guys do, but there's a difference between collaborating with each other in a fashion where every single project that you're driving need to have some level of outcome, for finance, and the same, for CRO organization as well. Because if I'm in finance and all of a sudden I'm tasked with driving this project to increase our revenue, improve some of our KPIs, I need to make sure that that folks within the CRO organizations are aware as well, and I have their input. So that way I can clearly outline the risk and reward, right? And truly, if I'm building a business case and initiative, I need that input, and vice versa. If the CRO organization is leading an initiative to reduce their churn, increase their market share, right? There is a finance input, right? So I think both of those truly need to come together and work together. And that goes beyond just having a weekly sync or a monthly sync. That's more, trying to both of them involved in a fashion that, is again, is clearly, like collaboration at its best. So again, that's what I've kind of seen at least work really, really well is, both of those organizations. If you're a CRO, you involve finance in your weekly stand-up, your daily stand-up, whatever that may look like. And if you're a finance organization, you include the CRO organization, folks that truly drive a lot of the decision making in your sort of, day-to-day sort of operation. So they kind of both understand where, each other are coming from. And I think that truly creates a ton of value.
Yeah, I agree with all of that wholeheartedly. I would say, just to add on to that, one, I think it's super useful when the go-to-market and finance teams are aligned on metrics and first principles. So, from a metric standpoint, here's how we measure growth. There's a simple, silly thing that I've seen in some cases where sales leaders are thinking about their bookings as measured by commissions payouts. So, I hit, or my team hit 120% when, and ideally that should track pretty closely to how the company's measuring performance. But in every company I've worked at, commissions calculations are slightly different. Being able to speak the language of company goals is very important. So, and that's not just your ops team, that's your sales managers on the field. Anybody who wants any career mobility down the line needs to be able to understand that executives don't care what your commission attainment is. They care what your performance is relative to company goals. So, an alignment on what metrics are important, what metrics we're tracking, how we measure those metrics, and also how we think about investment and, or disinvestment decisions. So, instead of just saying, here's our hiring plan for this year, we're going to hire 10 AEs, you say, look, we're going to, where our baseline projection is this much in growth. We're going to hire 10 AEs as a baseline assumption. Here's how we're going to space them out. And here's how we're measuring performance throughout the year to gauge whether we hire the next 6 or we dial it up or we dial it down. Let's agree on a set of rules and principles around how we operate so that you're not consistently having these issues throughout the year. And then, I would say on aligning to functional goals, which is also a very important area of alignment. Like, your finance teams and your go-to-market teams need a lot of things from each other. And it's very easy for people in just their, busy days to kind of prioritize what matters to their side of the house. Commissions forecasts are always going to matter more to the finance team than the ops team. And the ops team is always going to rank it, 10th on their list of priorities, if not more. But ultimately, the ops team needs things from finance too. The ops team needs to, justify investment decisions, might need, software tooling, whatever. I just think that a relationship where finance and go-to-market are in the habit of asking each other, what are the most important things you need from me? And I will, do my best to deliver and to be a good collaborator. That's just sort of, good professional hygiene. But I think that, good professional hygiene can actually go a long way toward a collaborative relationship.
Got it, got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And the other thing that I wanted to touch upon, and Nabeel, you mentioned this, that you also created this in-house ARR model. What was the process of your doing that? How was, again, the GTM team involved? How was the finance team involved? What were some of the challenges that you faced while you created that? Would be good to get a sense of that. And again, Hasib, feel free to jump in terms of how you do these. How have you seen people do these things at outreach, and what are some of the challenges that you have seen to come to that common ARR model?
Yeah, so I'll say organizationally, I was in a uniquely favorable position to be able to impact change at the company because we had a CEO with whom I had a very good relationship. I reported to the CFO, who was actually he was on loan to us from the private equity firm that controlled our company. And I had his buy-in as well. And between the CEO and the CFO, who both had invested in me a lot of confidence, I could make a reasonable case for anything that they, thought made sense and then push it out. And I'll say the speed of change there was pretty mind-boggling. We're talking about sort of, I don't know, 2 to 3 months of sort of development of this metric and sort of building out our way to calculate it. And it ended up being what the company was bonused on, what every bonus employee was bonused on. It ended up being how we compensated our customer success folks who were being paid out on net retention of ARR. So it was a really rapid process of adoption. And that wasn't just a function of sort of where I sat in the company straddling. I reported to the CFO, but I ran ops and had some strategic finance responsibilities as well. But it was also just the perceived need for this metric because before this metric was rolled out, we were missing GAAP revenue forecasts consistently, and by, in some cases, sort of a painful amount. And so, and what we realize is we know the things that are driving the variances. It's just a matter of building a systematic approach to understanding the moves in our business. So, if our biggest customer just renewed 2 months ago for 60% of their unit price that they were paying before, well, that's a very known change in our ARR, and that could be a pretty material one. So you can't just use their last 12 months as as a good guide for what our ARR is. So we knew the things that were driving these misses, and we had big misses that made it really hard for us to forecast accurately. There was a pain point that we understood very well. And so it became pretty easy because of where I was sitting, to drive ARR as sort of the gospel be-all, end-all metric that drove the company, from which everything else, net retention, gross retention, cost to acquire, whatever, sort of flowed.
Absolutely. I think what I've kind of seen, again, in my last role and a couple of roles that I've kind of held prior to that is, um, you know, tooling plays a huge role, right? How you truly, understand your revenue, a lot of the metrics that you truly care about as a business and where you want to invest, right, in order to grow your business sustainably, right? And in doing so, a lot of companies that have, again, depending on, what kind of, business planning tool you have in place, a lot of sort of the legacy systems don't really truly capture the essence of the ever-changing sort of industry needs that we have, especially when you talk about sort of consumption-based models, right? A lot of tools that we've used from Oracle to SAP to, some of the new age like, Anaplan, Adaptive, they really are not sort of focused on truly serving the finance, the go-to-market functions, right? It's more around trying to provide level of visibility into your financials and then be able to forecast and understand your budget and so on and so forth. But you truly need, in order to really align, the go-to-markets team, the finance organization, ops organization, you truly need a team, a software solution that can bring in a lot of these data inputs. And some could be all the way on the engineering front, right? Especially when you talk about consumption models, because a lot of these tools won't just retract and truly put in that data in a way that's useful, right? So a lot of teams, the way I've kind of seen is they build sort of these homegrown solutions, right? If you have enough money to invest, you have a data warehousing tool like Snowflake, and then you get something like Looker, Tableau, and you bring in the data points from all of these different sources. You build in a data hub, and then on top of that, then you start doing reporting. So that requires an immense amount of investment, right? You have to have a well sort of mature BI organization that can, have dedicated resources aligned to that. Because again, things break, they change, and the CEO, the CFO, the CRO are looking for different metrics, and all of a sudden now if you go in and adjust the data. So I feel like that, really driving that process, there's really not a ton of automation because you're going to consistently need to invest to keep up that process. So that's where I think, a tool, a solution that can bridge that gap and bring in all of those various data inputs together and provide something that will be useful, something that you can truly change at the tip of your fingers, right? Something that you don't need resources to go in and be able to adjust instances, and one of the examples that I can give is anytime that we would have a shift in the way we were sort of reporting on these metrics, especially the system that we had in place, you would have to go in and ask the BI team if they had a dedicated resource or whether they had time or capacity. And a lot of time that was sort of put on the back burner. And that was truly crucial, right? If you're making decisions on the go, especially in the market that we're in right now, you can't wait a month or two in order for something to sort of come in and for you to get that level of exposure. So
That's another point I neglected to mention. We had a data and dev resource on our team to be able to do this sort of not only in-house, but in team. And that was, kind of a luxury as well. But yeah, to your point, I mean, it was totally homegrown. We, we and the solution's important, not just to be able to calculate this effectively, but like if you're going to be measuring a company on these sorts of metrics, you need to make it available in a timely fashion. You need to push it out. You need to, so like UX matters and reporting and insights and analytics matter. And, you have your CSM who's coming to tell you, my ARR, shrank by 20%. What happened with this customer? And you need to tell them, it was driven by the last renewal, or it was driven by organic consumption, or whatever it is. And so, for this sort of thing, to your point, yes, I think we were blessed to have sort of the most favorable conditions for building a thing in-house and for change management, but it's a huge and heavy lift, and it very much matters that a solution is able to be reliable, to incorporate the data sources you need to make, calculations that make sense for the business, and to present them in a way that that is easily consumable.
absolutely. And I think, you think back, with a lot of sort of the homegrown solutions, right? You have the way I've kind of seen it, finance looks at, the various metrics, KPIs, things that, what happened last month, last quarter, why did, there's a shift, upwards or downwards within their sort of revenue streams. And a lot of time they go back and calculate, and then they're sending these spreadsheets back and forth and getting input from the go-to-markets team. I think that's where it truly becomes helpful when you have a tool that sort of centralizes a lot of that communication, right? Where you can build a lot of these toolings, a lot of these metrics alongside the organization, like the CRO, the go-to-market team that you're working with. So no, absolutely. I think that is the key. And I feel like that's the solution that a lot of these consumption-based models or consumption-based SaaS organization will need to truly operate in this, especially in this environment right now.
I think all of this has been super helpful. Would love to hear any final thoughts that you might have, any advice for companies, for GTM teams, finance teams, any last words? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can take the first bite at that. I think, I truly actually really sorry, enjoy this conversation. I've been hearing Nabeel's point, it's crucial to, really have a really solid collaboration. And I think a lot of that has to do with, truly building, a solution that works, best for both teams, right? It can be just a solution that works really, really well for finance and not have a level of impact on the go-to-market organization that, can truly capture the essence of the business in a way to help them scale and grow, right? So I think being able to build a solution at a complex business that really targets both of these organizations in a way to kind of bridge the gap, bring them together, and have them work on initiative and truly capture their financials in a way that they're not able to do right now. And I think it's that to me is a step forward for a lot of organization in truly sort of tackling the ever-changing sort of macroeconomic condition we're in right now. Because I feel like, to me personally, the conditions are only going to get worse from this point on. And I think businesses that will truly survive in these sort of tough times are ones that can truly justify their investments, right? Everything has to be looked at from an ROI standpoint. And I think in order to do that, you need to have a tool that can truly scale and bring a lot of these sort of data inputs together, data points together, and then be able to spit out solutions, metrics, KPIs, and track a lot of these things at a level that they're not able to right now. And all of that without really investing in a ton of resources. Because again, for a lot of organizations, including finance, investment in resourcing is limited. Not a lot of organizations are in a position to really truly increase their workforce. And if you can't do that, you have to have a solution in play that will sort of bridge the gap. And you can't really burden your go-to-market finance teams, organization, and your sales organization on things that are truly more operation, right? You want go-to-market teams to go in and capture more sales, reduce their churn rates, really truly increase their revenue, their net retention scores, and all of that, right? So you want to make sure that they're aware of everything that's going on. They're collaborating with finance, but are not spending immense amount of time on a lot of those activities. So for that, I truly think that what you guys are building right now at Manatees, I think is truly crucial for a lot of organizations that truly want to sort of head in the right direction without truly investing in a ton of resources.
Yeah, I would add on to that that the central problem that I understand we're trying to solve is that the SaaS model was sort of invented as you no longer pay for a big bulky installation of a thing, and you now basically subscribe to whatever service you're looking for on a kind of predictable annual seat-based kind of model, the sort of CRM Salesforce model. And that's just that's an awkward model for many businesses, and not every business is a perfect subscription annual SaaS model. And so if if the tools and frameworks were more widespread, better understood, if software existed to address, consumption-based businesses, or businesses that were, heavily transactional, or businesses that were, heavily service-based, or whatever, if these sorts of changes from the ordinary SaaS model were better understood by the industry, we wouldn't have had to build the ARR in-house tool that we built. But it's very important to in building the tool, needless to say, to understand sort of the, let's say, if we're going to take an 80-20 rule, sort of the 80% of use cases that are out there that deviate from the model, that really need tools that don't exist out there for recurring revenue forecasting and analysis. But I imagine that there are a good number of use cases that are reasonably widespread, figuring out sort of the commonalities and being able to address their very specific use cases in a way that's kind of generalizable, is going to be the key challenge here, I think.
Perfect. Thank you so much for doing this, Hasib and Nabeel. This was a great conversation. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone I share it with will also agree. So, yeah, thank you again for the talk. Thank you, Hasib. Thank you, Nabeel.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having
It
me.
was really nice meeting you, Nabeel.
Likewise.
Yeah. Have a good day. Bye.